What's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of the Victorious Ones podcast, the place where gaming meets comics, meets sports, meets movies, as well as inspiration, along with music as well. And once again, I'm your host, King Von Jr. You can follow me on social media on Twitter /X, Twitter at 301 King Von Jr. You can follow the show's Twitter page at VictoryPod1. I'm also on Instagram at Mr. King Von Jr. You can follow the show's Instagram page at Victorious Ones Podcast. I'm also the social media producer for, of course, Perfect Plex Talk Radio, hosted by a friend of the program, Mike Knox, on Mondays at 6 p.m. So, of course, there's quite a bit, to get into in this episode. You know what I mean? So first and foremost, of course, congratulations to the Los Angeles Dodgers for winning back-to-back World Series championships. As you can tell, you know what I mean? I got the Kendrick shirt. This is my victory lap, outfit for this episode, because I was wondering, trying to figure out, okay, what am I gonna, wear to celebrate? And so here we go. You know what I mean? And as a matter of fact, today I ordered a blue Dodgers, a World Series shirt off Fanatics, I believe so. Yes, off Fanatics. I'm looking at get a hoodie, get whatever I can, in order to celebrate. And it's very fitting that the Dodgers beat the Blue Jays. It's very symbolic to how, it's very much, reminds me of, Kendrick beat Drake. So Kendrick gets another L, and this time, not just in music, but also in sports. And it's amazing how Major League Baseball jumped in on the pettiness as well, because they, because the funny thing is they even made their own, Photoshop edit. How memes, you got to jump on that quickly. So they made a meme of, of Kendrick driving off in that black GNX car that's on his album, driving off. He's got the World Series, trophy on top. And as he's driving off, he's looking back, laughing at Drake, and Drake's just standing left behind, and on the ground it says "Not like us," you know what I mean? So leave it to them to to jump in on this as well. Drake is catching everlasting L's. So like I say, congratulations, to the Dodgers, and I mean that was a thriller game, like that right there. If anything, that was legendary. That was one for the ages. You know what I mean? Like as far for those that don't even follow baseball, or at least one of those, series. Yeah, they don't even seen legendary series in a long time. Ever from probably since the era of Jeter and the Yankees and stuff like that. At least it was somewhere up there with that. But that was absolute cinema. And it was Yamamoto. This year he won. This time he won the World Series MVP. Last year was Freddie Freeman. So we very much say that the Dodgers are certainly a dynasty. This is what the third in about 5 or 6 years. Because I know they won in 2020, and then they went back to back. Last year and this year. And I like how this team is comprised of players who come from franchise, who come from other teams, that didn't want to pay them. These players come from other teams that did not want to pay them, and so so the Dodgers made that investment in those players that that were sort of pretty much written off or cast off, whatever owners being cheap about it. And now those other teams are kicking themselves. Whether it's, they just play, these other teams played in their faces. Of course, whether it's Shohei Ohtani, who is absolute generational talent, he's, he will soon be in the contention for being the GOAT, when it's all said and done. So I would certainly put him, when it's all said and done. I can very well make a case for him being the GOAT of the franchise itself. You know what I mean? So he was mega superstar, player. You know what I mean? And to the point where Magic Johnson, definitely sung his praises as well as Freddie Freeman's. You know what I mean? So as far as that, yeah. So like I said, as far as Dodger news, if you will, MLB World Series news. Yeah, like I said, as far as that's concerned, um, and the thing is, this series could have gone either way. I mean, I was on the absolute edge of my seat. You know what I mean? Like, from beginning to end, and the fact that the Dodgers did not close out the series, at home, um, and they had to go back to Toronto at the very end. I mean, there's a part of me that kind of figures go 7 games, but I really wanted to end sooner. But hey, I'm not mad at it. You know what I mean? Yeah, like I said, if anything, like I said, so like I said, I'm not mad at it whatsoever. Um, I'm just glad that they got it. Like I said, Otani, was somebody that the Angels did not want to, pay up for. So of course goes across, across the other end of the city, um, and ends up, becoming the back-to-back champion. Um, Mookie Betts, you know, I know, I know what say Boston, I believe it was, like it's anything, I know that they're, kicking themselves right now, in terms of, the way that they fumbled with that one. That's one of the biggest fumbles of all time, when it comes to baseball or just sports, period. Giving them a guy like that, as transcendent as he is, yeah, what teams that they didn't want to pay him, that's their loss. Um, Freddie Freeman, another one. I mean, I could go on and on and on. So it's not so much for the sake of them creating a super team and all this other type of stuff, but it's just a collection of players, that the franchise decides, what, we're going to invest in these players, and and pay them what they're worth, what they deserve to be owed. And it's certainly paying off. The morale is at an all-time high. Uh, you know, like I say, of course, Magic Johnson, was being interviewed, each time the game was in Los Angeles, and of course he was a spectator for all throughout the series, and of course the thing is with the Dodgers, they have helped him win, have about between 16 and 18 rings at this point. You know what I mean? So, and the fact that he has that many rings, combined from player to to being an ownership is remarkable. You know what I mean? Um, I mean, pretty much. Of course, I jokingly said, I'm like, look, Larry Bird would never. You know what I mean? And so I was like, wow. Like now, people starting to, hopefully this will put more respect on his name, in terms of GOAT resumes, because this guy has a certified, unquestionable, GOAT resume. You know what I mean? Some people talk about Larry this and Steph that. Nah, it's Magic is the guy before them. Um, and the thing is, when it comes to his imprint in that city, like it speaks volumes. He's pretty much Mr. Los Angeles for real. Um, what I mean? Like like I said, he's for years, for 45 years at least, 45, 46, years. This guy has had the city essentially wrapped around his finger. Um, whether it's a player or even even behind the scenes in the front office as executive, you name it. This is his castle, if you will. Pretty much, the Forum was the house that Magic built, and to see him, have a resurgence as an LA champion in baseball. He's done it five. He's done it 5 times as a player, basketball. He's done it another 5 times. As like I said, as a member of the Lakers front office. Whether it's the 3 people, Shaq and Kobe, or the back-to-back, Kobe rings. Like as far as that, then you look at, what he's done with with the Los Angeles Sparks. I know I want to say it was a soccer team or something. That they want to win championships with as well. And then you look at what then you look at what he's done. Like so as far as being with the Dodgers, being a part owner, and you might as well say that he has about at least like 2 Infinity Gauntlets, pretty much 2 or 3 Infinity Gauntlets, worth of rings. You know what I mean? Like, this is GOAT status, GOAT resume, that cannot be denied whatsoever. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. Magic has one of the most ironclad cases and resumes of any athlete of all time. Period. R.I.P. to the late great Bill Russell, Mr. 11 Rings, what have you. But but it's just like for Magic to do what he did, even as an executive, if that's what gives him extra edge, then hey, so be it. You know what I mean? Yeah. Salute to Magic, salute to the Dodgers, salute to K-Dot, salute to Ice Cube. Who's performed during Dodgers games. You know what I mean? And of course, he drove out during the Dodgers parade. Drive along, driving with the World Series trophy. You know what I mean? Like I said, salute to Ice Cube, salute to O'Shea Jackson Jr. You know what I mean? Salute to Los Angeles. Period. The city of angels, the city of champions. You know what I mean? So it's just like, it's like if I wasn't from DC, I would either be from New York or Los Angeles. Plain and simple. Maybe it's like it's LA, I don't know. But yeah, like I said, as far as that, like I said, if anything, I'll say like this. As I said before, if it wasn't from DC, more likely, like I said, probably be from LA. That's just me. But yeah, let's see, Dodger talk. And also this past weekend, like I said, shout out, to my church, as we did as we had a harvest festival, on Halloween. So it's like an alternative, alternative for Halloween, and just giving them a safer alternative, if you will. Fun, all type of fun and games, and just share the gospel, if you will. So yeah, that's really what it was. On the flip side, of course, like I see outside of Harvest Festival at my church, that was great. But also Maryland had their University of Maryland had their homecoming. You know what I mean? So of course I was there for that. Like, so great environment, great atmosphere. The game was not so great. Maryland got stomped out and just straight up dragged left and right, by Indiana in ways I'd never seen, University of Maryland get whooped ever in my life. And so, man, let's see what this. It was they. You want to talk about choosing violence? Yeah, 55-10. That's what the final score was at the end of the day. I left within the last 5 minutes of the game. Wasn't nothing left to see. Maryland, like I said, they hardly run the ball. Their defense was nowhere to be found. And so Indiana just cold-blooded took advantage of that and never looked back. Also on the flip side, even with that, of course, I want to talk talking about my NFL coverage, do the NFL recap, and as well as talk about the week in wrestling, especially when it comes to Saturday night's main event. That's the main thing I really want to cover. Excuse me for a moment. But Saturday night's main event, of course, is where the storm arrived. Jade Cargill, and like I said, more on that later. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to my NFL recap. And so let's go to see this thing run. And so, like I said, this week when it comes to the NFL, we saw on Thursday night football, the Baltimore Ravens finally got a win as they demolished the Miami Dolphins 28-6 in Miami. So for Sunday, the 49ers defeat the Giants 34-24. Chargers defeat the Titans 27-20. The Vikings defeat the Lions 27-24. The Patriots defeat the Falcons 24-23. Steelers defeat the Colts 27-20. Of course, the Broncos defeat the Texans 18-15. Bears and Bengals had a shootout. Chicago won 47-42. The Panthers defeat the Packers 16-13. The Rams ran through the Saints 34-10. The Jags defeat the Raiders 30-29. The Bills defeat the Chiefs 28-21. Let's see if they'll do it when it matters the most in the playoffs. The Seahawks destroy the Commodores 38-14. Of course, unfortunately, Jade Daniels got injured. Of course, thoughts and prayers with him. All that aside, and finally Monday Night Football. Unfortunately, the Dallas Cowboys lost to the Arizona Cardinals of all teams, 27-17. So that is my NFL recap. When it comes to NBA news, of course, the season is still very, very much young. Not as much. I know the Lakers defeat the Heat 130 to 120. And so as far as that's concerned, pretty much, like I said, not too much to really write home about. And of course, the Nuggets remain undefeated as they defeat the Kings. Right now, and so as far as that, Joker had his fourth straight triple double in a win against the Pelicans. So pretty much not too much to write home about when it comes to the NBA right now at this moment. But when it comes to wrestling, I'm going to definitely dive deeper into that, especially when it comes to this Halloween go home episode. Heading to Saturday night's main event. I don't want to sound like a backtracking, but the main things we talk about are Drew McIntyre getting mind games advantage over Cody Rhodes. Cody going to Saturday night's main event. You know what I mean? So he had the upper hand going to that. Eventually, spoiler alert, he lose. Then we have Jade Cargill and Timmy Stratton got separated by security before they get even brawl. And salute to Jade for her costumes. Like there was one she had one dressed up she was dressed up like the Punisher, and there was another one she was dressed up like Catwoman. So if there's anybody who is pretty much the cosplay queen when it comes to that women's locker room, you can very much say that title is going to go to Jade Cargill, especially when you look at her track record in AEW. So as far as that, I mean, when it comes to those costumes, Jade definitely delivers. So we see that Carmelo Hayes defeated Kip Wilson by way of pinfall after hitting the code breaker. After the match, Miz laid out Melo, attacked him. Alexa Bliss defeated Nia Jax by way of pinfall with a flash roller after a distraction from Charlotte Flair. The MFTs defeated the Motor City Machine Guns by way of pinfall after Tama Tonga hit the cutthroat on Chris Sabin. And so as far as that, so of course after that, Ray Phoenix and Nakamura tried to rescue the Motor City Machine Guns before being laid out by the MFTs. So now it's time to go into the recap of Saturday night's main event, and and of course this was only 4 matches long. So in the Paul Levesque era of WWE, so it's all about being here for a good time, not a long time, and so that's why many times in matches, we see the pay-per-views, PLEs, the cards are condensed, just because because there are very few matches, and in this case, they were all title matches, and so my predictions were so on point. It was almost scary when it came to Saturday night's main event. So I'm watching Abbott Elementary right now. It's hilarious. You know what I mean? But yeah, let's go into it. Let's get into it. Let me see if I can get my belt. As I continue to be a predictions champion. You know what I mean? So as far as that, like I say, these predictions were, definitely fed me very well. And so, I'm going to this. So, so of course as far as the match card, we had CM Punk versus Jade Uso, Jade Cargill versus Tiffany Stratton. Of course, Cody Rhodes versus Drew McIntyre, and Dominic Mysterio versus Rusev versus Penta. And so, Saturday night's main event, so it was Salt Lake City, Utah as well. And so of course, the opening match. The opening match was CM Punk versus Jey Uso. So they definitely did not waste time at all whatsoever. And congratulations to CM Punk for defeating Jey Uso to reclaim the World Heavyweight Championship, especially since Seth Rollins is not around anymore. And Seth's stipulation was that as long as he was the champion, sorry about that. His stipulation was as long as he was the champion, as long as he was the champion, Punk could not get a shot at the title. But now that Rollins is out of the picture, all that's changed. And also, of course, recently, as I mentioned before, Jey Uso, was really up in his feelings about everybody saying that he was, just all about entrance and nothing else. But the thing is, but the thing about it is that when you constantly run back your entrance music, that's what you give the impression of, and so, and the thing is, like I say, Jay wasn't exactly in his element in this match, so if anything, I'm not mad with the result, what I mean, and so, I may admit, if anything, it may have, been better had he got it directly off of Seth, but unfortunately, with the nature injuries being the nature of the beast, unfortunately, that it is what it is. What I mean? But of course, like I said, I'm glad that they pulled the trigger and and got Punk to win it. Because with Jay, he's popular, he's got entrance, but outside of that, this is not that much to really deal with. And clearly, Jay was in his feelings because he had that Instagram story saying, "All right, y'all won." Talking about the fans, saying the fans won because he lost, and of course, he had the middle finger emoji. You know what I mean? So especially with the online criticism and all that stuff like that, that's what he was referring to. But it's just that, what I mean, it's just like, WWE Unreal. I feel as though exposed a whole lot of stuff, especially when it came to Jay. And I've talked about this before, about how they exposed the fact, that he would easily run out of breath, like as far as like get winded, as they say, get blown up, um, that, and just I don't know, it's just something about in terms of his mic skills, feel like they're just being stagnant. And of course, he's great when it comes to selling merch, but to be taken seriously, um, for a guy who says he's equal to Roman Reigns, not at all. Um, you know, he just really doesn't do himself that many favors. You know what I mean? So as far as that, like I said, and plus nobody wanted to see Jay be a three-time champion. They feel like like that's overkill. Especially with with his first two reigns not being all that special. You know what I mean? So I'm not mad at it. Of course, you like I said, your winner, and once again the world heavyweight champion, good old CM Punk, and this time he held it for longer than 5 minutes. And so I was like, yeah, like I said, as far as that's concerned, excuse me, and um, also it's been announced that there will be a 16-man tournament that will take place to determine John Cena's final opponent at Saturday night's main event. And so this is something that Mike and I talked about on Monday when it comes to that bracket. You know what I mean? So so we had names such as Obafemi, Gunther, LA Knight, Carmelo Hayes, The Miz. Who else? I want to say Penta was on there. Rusev. You know what I mean? So yeah, pretty much who's who on the main roster in terms of potential opponents. Potential opponents for John Cena's last match. And what we ultimately came up with, ended up being Obafemi or Drew McIntyre. Especially since Drew's never had a match with Cena. Surprisingly, and the thing is, of course, it'll look great to see Gunther, get a shot at him at the end, and especially if Gunther were to, since he ended Goldberg's career this year, earlier this year, it would have been great to see him, in Cena's career as well. So pretty much that wouldn't be bad. So if anything, that's definitely going to be, to be continued at this point. And I definitely look forward to it. So, in fact, Cena spent nearly 24 years with the company and set a WWE record with 17 world titles. He's won the WWE Championship 14 times and the World Heavyweight Championship 3 times. So there you have it. And also, like I said, of course, also we had Jade Cargill versus Tiffany Stratton, and that was the women's version of Lesnar versus Cena from the 2014 SummerSlam. Because Jade was taking Tiffany to Suplex City. Not to mention not to mention the fact that that Tiffany's injured. But still, even with that, I'm not going to use that to negate Jade's win. But this is the Jade Cargill that we need to see more often. It's like it's fun for men like Goldberg, and Hogan, to thrive, have decorated careers with 3 to 4, with a moveset like 3 to 4 moves. But when it comes to the women, it's just like they expect you to have entire treasure chest of moves, especially when it comes to someone like Jade. Like, come on, Jade relies on dominance, on power, supremacy, and they really, cater to those strengths. in this match. Um, I was highly impressed, and I was like, especially those consecutive power bombs, right before Jade hit Timothy with Jaded. If anything, this is my favorite moment of the night, because now Jade Cargill has become the first woman of Jamaican descent to win a WWE championship. People like to say she's the first person. No, Big E was the first one to do it. Big E's the first and only, male wrestler of Jamaican descent to win the WWE championship. Jade Cargill is the first woman of Jamaican descent to win the WWE women's championship. And with that being said, that continues to add to the resume and dominance of the big three. The big three. Of course, Bianca, Jade, and Naomi. And I think it's very much safe to say that the big three have dominated WWE in 2025. You know what I mean? Like I said, this 2024, 2025 season, this era right now, like in terms of how connected they are, that, when it comes to storyline standpoint, when it comes to accolades standpoint, all these different things, just impact. This is, like I said, this is the big three era, if you will. To see three, black women, three proud black women, three, fierce, fearless, bold black women, bold and just downright beautiful as well. To succeed and dominate. Just the way that they have, is absolutely remarkable. And there's nothing that anybody can take away from that. There's nothing anybody can do or say, otherwise. What I mean? So as far as that, and matter of fact, this is definitely another one of the other talking points, of our show on Monday as well. And so it's just that, so of course tonight, like I said, as far as this podcast, we're celebrating Jade, especially, like I said, for that. And it's just like, that she's one of one, when it comes to her star power. I mean, that speaks volumes in of itself. So that's why, I'm looking forward to see how her and Bianca's paths will cross when Bianca returns. If there's any return I'm looking forward to the most from the women's division, by far is Bianca Belair over everybody else by more than a country mile. Bianca versus Jade, especially with the way that they were constantly matched up with each other when Jade was in AEW. People were constantly, like, I'm looking forward to that being a fantasy matchup. Like I said, just the names were linked together, for the longest time. And then once Jade arrives, at the 2024 Royal Rumble last year, and her and Bianca both do, their gorilla press slam and drop Becky and Liv and just stare at each other. You know what I mean? Like I say, just walk closer to each other, like face to face. And Bianca, like it's just like they just look like, yeah, we got something going. Pretty much like, yeah, this is my dance partner. You know what I mean? Like that. That's the body language that they gave. And then for them to link up as tag team champions.
This is the easiest thing I've ever done.
You know what I mean? Like that just added even more to their story, to their connection. And I know Mike and I have had our concerns when it comes to Bianca sort of taking a back seat, especially in this stage of her career. Concerns is that that this may sort of dim her light a little bit as a main event star. Especially with her being this selfless, you know what I mean? Um, pretty much like selling for a role that she doesn't have to, doesn't have to settle with right now. Uh, all really all for the sake of elevating Jade and covering Jade's weaknesses. That's really, what this thing was ultimately all about. Uh, and you know, uh, Mike and I, of course, like I said, we jokingly said that Bianca is the Mandalorian and Jade is Grogu. Especially with the way that the Mandalorian always had to carry Grogu around. That's how Bianca's been having to carry Jade. But now, Jade is making more of a name for herself individually outside the big three. Whether it was, like I said, whether it was her winning Queen of the Ring, and then now eventually, of course, eventually becoming the women's champion. So all three of them, like all three members of the big three, like I said, have highly decorated resumes now. And for Jade to do what she's done in such a short period of time with the company speaks volumes, And so, if, of course, like I said, I'm not going to belabor this any longer. But as far as that, of course, with the other matches of the night, we also saw that Cody Rhodes defeated Drew McIntyre, and Drew takes another loss consecutively. You know what I mean? Like the never-ending losses. And of course, Dominic Mysterio retained the Intercontinental Championship in a great match against Penta and Rusev, no DQ. You know what I mean? And just the different twists and turns that Dominic would use, and really the tricks and tactics, if you will. Whether it was whether it was ringing the bell, while Rusev had Penta an accolade and just used that as a diversion, a distraction. To ultimately, like to ultimately get what he wanted, to lie, cheat, and steal. And so, like I say, as far as that, like I said, congratulations to Dirty Dom, still your Intercontinental Champion as well as your AAA champion. You know what I mean? So that's something great to see. And so it's really all four. I've been writing on my predictions, and there was a photo that CM Punk shared. Of course, on social media. And it's a backstage picture of him, Jay Cargill, Cody Rhodes, and Ricky Saints, all as champions. And what's the one thing they have in common? They were all in AEW. So Tony Khan's got to be punching the air and kicking himself, you know what I mean? And as I mentioned before, when it came to the Dodgers, they were comprised of players that, the previous teams did not want to pay. And so those previous teams fumble, and it's the same thing when it came to Tony and AEW. He royally fumbled, epically fumbled. For really big names, and they have gone over to the rival company, and won championships.
I can't take this. It's straight up torture. Leave my phone. Y'all better than me. We are not better than. I need my phone too.
But like I said, as far as that, that image, that visual, just speaks volumes. And like I said, CM Punk, of all people shared it, so you already know that was his, proverbial middle finger. You know what I mean? And so that's why I call him CM Petty. You know what I mean? So if anything, that, like I said, that image right there, just speaks volumes of how Tony caught, some of the biggest L's that you could ever catch. And people wonder why. I'm pretty sure there are people who wonder why I don't do AEW coverage on here. You know what I mean? Because just like, why would I, like if anything, why would I review a botch fest, a botch mania company? No, I'm not doing that. But I did great on those predictions. And so if I were to give this a belt grade, um, I would give it about 4 out of 5. Uh, Still thinking about it right now. Trying to decide which championship. Like I say, which championship. I want to. Which WWE champion I want to associate this with. Right about 4 out of 5. Eddie Guerrero, WWE championships. What I mean? Just throwing something out there. But maybe I'd give something a little bit higher. Like I said, maybe 4 out of 5 Kurt Angle WWE titles. Um, but yeah, like I said, as far as that, like I said, just that image in and of itself, and just the impact, that these names have had since they've arrived, whether they arrived for the first time or made the return. If anything, the biggest loser out of all this is AEW, All Elite WWE. Go figure. So then I'm going to go into, of course, Monday Night Raw. And so of course, like I said, not too much, like I said, to really, write home about when it comes to this stuff. So, well, I will say, the biggest headline, out of all this was when Logan Paul dropped CM Punk and joined the Vision, knocking out CM Punk, and and aligning himself with the Vision to eventually really be Seth Rollins' replacement. So as far as that's concerned, yeah. Also, of course, we had CM Punk and Jey Uso versus Braun Breaker and Bronson Reed in a double countout. And this, like I said, this is what the Logan Paul factor came into play. What I mean? So of course, like I said, Logan Paul slid into the ring to stand alongside CM Punk, much like he did earlier that night. But anything doing with Logan Paul, he ain't gonna be no babyface. Plain and simple. So of course, like I said, instead of running, Bronson Reed and Braun Breaker grabbed chairs of their own, and Logan Paul slid into the ring, stand alongside Punk, and then Paul slipped on brass knuckles before he turned and knocked out CM Punk. And so as far as that, they handed the brass knuckles to Paul Heyman, before they both laughed, just showing off the air. So that was the ultimate twist. Is that Logan is part of the Vision, so he's in Seth's spot now. In other news on Raw, we have Roxanne Perez and Raquel Rodriguez defeating Nikki Bella and Stephanie Bakir by way of pinfall. Of course, after Roxanne Perez hit pop rocks on Nikki Bella. Afterwards, Nikki apologized to Stephanie and said she feels too rusty to hang with the new stars of the division. And of course, WWE's being a Nikki Bella love fest right now. Stephanie Bakir, talked her up and told her she paved the way for everyone. I don't know about everyone, and certainly not someone the caliber of Stephanie's caliber. I couldn't say that, but whatever. We saw Penta defeated Ronda Americana by way of pinfall with the Mexican Destroyer. Amazing. And then we also saw that Rey Mysterio hit Dominic with the 619. After the father and son, like I said, after both father and son exchanged words, and Rey took exception to Dominic claiming that he was the king of the luchadors, told Dominic that he would never be that would never be true as long as Rey's around. So as Dominic tried to hit his dad with a cheap shot, but of course he had to run away after Rey got the better of him. And of course Rey hit him with the 619. I said Becky Lynch, of course, came from the crowd to cut a promo. And so, she focused on a bad run with Seth Rollins being injured and a referee out to get her in her ongoing issues with Maxine Dupree. And she said the next time she faced Dupree, one wrong move will make it the last opportunity in Dupree's career. And it's just like, I'm thinking to myself, what was the point of AJ making this return? What I mean? Like, I feel like AJ's just a one-hitter quitter and, one and done. What I mean? So if anything, Becky's real arch nemesis is on break, nowhere to be found. Then we have Oscar and Kairi Sane, great chemistry. Defeat Bailey and Lyra Valkyrie by way of submission after Oscar caught Lyra in the Oscar lock. And so afterwards we saw Alexa Bliss and Charlotte Flair run to the ring to save Lyra from any further attack after the match. When it comes to World Tag Team titles, we had AJ Styles and Dragon Lee defeat Jade McBobblehead and Finn Balor by way of pinfall with the Styles Clash. AJ Styles hit JD McBobblehead with the Styles Clash. Then, of course, we have Rusev versus Damian Priest and Shinsuke Nakamura versus Sheamus were announced as the first two opening round matches in the tournament to determine John Cena's final opponent. So we have Rusev versus Damian Priest on one end. We have Shinsuke Nakamura and Sheamus on the other end. To determine who's going to be John Cena's last opponent. And so, what time is time for NXT? And another set of AEW talent that they're champions. Of course, you look at of course, like I say, you look at Ethan Page and Chelsea Green when it comes to the mixed tag. When it comes to the mixed tag champions, if you will. So as far as that. And of course, I would say that the highlight of NXT last night was Chelsea and Ethan's, it was a Muy Grande championship celebration. Two Canadians holding, like when it comes to North American championships, whatever. So of course we have Fatal Influence versus Lola Vice in the culling. The winners of this match by way of pinfall, Fatal Influence. Then we have El Grande Americano versus Josh Briggs. El Grande Americano wins by way of submission with a Steiner recliner. Then we have Ren Sinclair versus Zarya for the WWE Speed Women's Championship Tournament first round. Winner by way of pinfall from a lateral press is Zarya. Then we have Kalani Jordan versus Tyra May Steele. That's when things really got heated. Kalani Jordan wins by way of pinfall with a split-legged moonsault. We also have Javon Evans versus Saquon Sugars. The young OG wins by pinfall with a diving tornillo. So that is just about it. And of course, like I said, as far as the highlight, was of course the Canadian celebration, if you will. So of course, as far as that. And of course, with that being said, Joe Hendry appeared. When you say his name, he appears. So as far as that, and so clearly the party was crashed as they smashed Chelsea Green into a cake and break a decoration over Ethan Page's head before smashing him with the cake too. So of course it was Joe Hendry and Thea Hale. As the party crashes. And so yes, that's pretty much it right there. And so, like I said, as far as that's concerned, that's pretty much it right there. So that's just about it. So now it is time to go into of course. After that, now it's time to go into the birthdays. November 5th, NBA legend Bill Walton. Bill Walton will turn 53. November 7th, King Kong Bundy Bill Walton will turn 73. Excuse me. November 5th, Bill Walton will turn 73. Excuse me. November 7th, King Kong Bundy will turn 68. November 8th, of course, Keith Lee turns 41. November 9th, Chris Jericho, of course, turns 55. And of course, Keeks turns 34. Of course, November 10th, Warren G turns 55. Cowboy Bob Orton turns 75. And Stan Michael, of course, turns 35. And that is of course, that's it for the birthdays. And before I go, I would like to give a word of wisdom. And it's to focus on the future. Your best days your best days are ahead of you. And so, and of course, also that yesterday is gone, and tomorrow is not promised to no man. And it's that when God promised you a future, He knew what you would face on your journey. And thing about it is that, of course, in order to reach for the future, you have to let go of the past. And the thing is, and like I say, of course, in order to look forward, your rear view has to be smaller than what the future is ahead of you. You know, and the thing is, faith lifts you out of where you've been, so that you can see things differently. Um, and so the thing is, you can never go where you've never been. We haven't seen what you haven't seen. And of course, ultimately, God is stirring you into a new season. And so that is my word of wisdom. And also remember that you are victorious, because greater is He that is in you than he that is in the world. When you put God in first place, you don't have to worry about being in last place. Please make sure to listen to this podcast on iTunes, Spotify, Google Podcasts, or anywhere else that you download podcasts. You can also watch by way of YouTube, of course, youtube.com/Von Resper Jr. Please make sure like and subscribe for more great content. And thank you very much for watching. Thank you very much for listening. And may this day be the absolute very best day of your life.